we've now established a good baseline for understanding visualization cues and how to pick them. So the first thing I want us to finish creating is the matrix table. We've already built out a basic table when developing our DAX measures in the last section. So this will be an easy introduction into enhancing our first visualization in Power BI. Taking a quick look at our report requirements, our focus is going to be on completing the requirements for the order details table. Now there are a couple measures we still need to create, specifically the year-over-year calculations, but we'll address those in a later video. If we take a look at the final report, this is the visualization we're going to create. We'll learn how to create this visualization, as well as apply some quality formatting and design elements to make it really blend well with the report. Alright, let's get started. To start with, let's look at the data that we have in front of us versus the requirements that we have for our order details table. We can see that most of our calculations have already been created. We're going to go ahead and pass over the year-over-year calculations because that will be covered in a later video. But we can see that there is one calculation that still hasn't been made, which is the net quantity. So we can actually go ahead and use the quick measures again to create that calculation. So to do that, as a reminder, let's come up to our fields list, right click on DAX measures. Let's go ahead and select new quick measure. From this drop down list, we're going to go ahead and move down to subtraction. And we're going to compare a couple of quantity fields we have created in our model. So we open up DAX measures. We're going to take our sales quantity as our base value and subtract the return quantity. And this will give us our net quantity value. Select OK. There we are, and come up to the upper left hand corner, we'll see that it created that calculation for us, and now let's just give it a friendlier name. Perfect. And I'll go ahead and add it to my table as well. Beautiful. So now that we have the calculations we need in our table, I want to convert this from a flat table, which is what you see in front of you now, into a matrix table instead over in that visualizations list. So we're going to come up here, and that icon with this actively being selected, and you can tell that the visualizations are actively selected whenever you see this little yellow box around one of them. That means one of the selections has been made on a visualization on your page. And I'm going to change that from a table over to this one on the right to a matrix table. Now for those of you unfamiliar with what the matrix table is, its design and function is extremely similar to a pivot table in Excel. Let me actually throw up an image of an Excel pivot table and we can compare the fields that you can use in both of them. They both contain 4 places you can input data. You have your rows, which will expand your data down onto rows. We already have our product category name in here, and as you can see on our table, that is showing that data displayed on the rows. Separately, a column that you put into the column section would then break that data out on across columns. They both contain a values section as well, where your data for aggregations goes. And then down here at the bottom, they also have the filters section for anything that you would want to filter to this object only. So let's start to build out this table towards those requirements. Now this is going to be an order details table, and what the client wants to have is to be able to have the ability to drill in and out of the geography all the way down to the store level. So that's why we created those hierarchies earlier. So let's go ahead and come up to our rows and get rid of the product category in here and eliminate that. And we're going to expand out our geography, and I'm going to grab the geography hierarchy right here. And you can see what happens. I can grab a single object, which is the geography hierarchy, and that will bring all of the columns with it. I'm going to put that on the rows. And then, as you can see, that added the continent, region and country, state, province, and city. And lastly, I'm going to grab from here the store name as well. Bring that in. Perfect. Now what I want to discuss with you is the hierarchy buttons that we have available in our table now. You might have noticed as I added these things in here, there's these buttons to expand and collapse within this little field list over here. 3 specific buttons for drill up, go to the next level, and expand out. And each of them does something a little bit different. And they function somewhat similarly to Excel, but there's a couple of other new features in here. So let's start with how it would work in the Excel environment. So Excel has those expand and collapse buttons as well in the pivot table, which is the expand all down. If I click this, it will now show me the top level of the hierarchy plus anything below it. and continue to do that further and further down all the way until I get, as an example, to this store name itself, and which part that button will no longer have the option to click because I've gone to the lowest level. Now let me go ahead and click back up to the top and discuss the other option as well. So that change or go to next level will just show you one level at a time. So let me click that and show you that functionality as well. There we are. We can see now that it's showing us a single level at a time as opposed to the expand out. That's the one thing that pivot tables do not have. So it's good to know how to use these and also to explain to your client or users how these are available because you get a lot of different perspectives for your data. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it expanded out to 2 levels just to give a little bit of data for my table. There we are. Now the last thing that I want to do with this is apply a couple of formatting settings. We haven't gotten into design or formatting yet for these visualizations, but the one thing that's great about these is that you can format them any way you need with a lot of ways to customize this. I'm going to show you 3 or 4 of them that I think is a great way to optimize the look and feel without spending too much time in the weeds formatting every single little thing. So to start with, let's come over to the format painter over here on the right, and I'm going to open up the style menu. These are themes that can be applied to the table. Now there's a lot of different ones in here. The one that works best for me most of the time is minimal. Set that. As you can immediately tell, it's cleaned up the color a little bit. It's minimized that. Just has a little light color for the lines in between each row, plus a distinguishing color between the sections as well to group the text versus data. Now what I want to do is I want to clean it up a bit more, add a little bit more color to make it really stand out. So I'm going to close style. I'm going to open up the grid. I'm going to change the outline color to maybe something a little bit darker. In this case, I'll pick a blue, and I'll kick that outline weight up 1. Now you can see on the left, it just made it a little bit more distinguished, and you can tell a bit more easily that it has a separation between the text and the data. Another thing I will do as well is I'm going to change that horizontal grid color to something a little bit darker, just to make it more easily noticeable. There are differences in the lines, and you can tell where one data stops and one data ends. Continuing down that list, go ahead and close the grid. I'm going to open up column headers. A good thing to turn off is the auto size column width. Because one thing that you do is as you're creating this report, you're going to size things appropriately. And eventually you'll get to a spot where, let's say, average order amount, you're going to want to size those appropriately as well. And by the way, these columns can be resized individually. But once I set them to a certain size, that's the size that I want it to stay at. I don't want it to automatically resize as my data changes. So I find that it's much more useful to turn off that auto sizing. I also like to have my column headers center aligned, so that alignment I will change from auto to center. There we are. And the last thing that I'll do is go ahead and move this down into the corner. One thing that I recommend is typically don't put your visuals directly into the corner. I like to leave a little bit of space to resize it that way. And then resize this over here so it fits up to the border of that. And just to note, you can see that the columns and the actual box for the visualization are 2 separate formats. So, use that knowledge accordingly and design it in a way that they fit together nicely. And drop that down a little bit more. Perfect. So that about covers it for the matrix table basics. In our next video, we're going to create a little bit more DAX and learn how to create that running total request that is part of our requirements list, and then create the visualization for that in Power BI.